I'm Pam Grossman, and I'm going to be reading from What is a Witch? With art by Tin Can Forest. I know what you have heard of my kind. They call us witches, bitches, hags and whores, harpies, vixens, sluts, and more. They say I kiss the devil's backside and couple with his front side, and that I cavort with my Sabbath sisters, wearing nothing but sky and a smile. They say I crunch on babies' bones and curdle milk and freeze crops, and I am wealthy, and I am poor, and I'm a power, and I'm a horror. They say I'm crone old or siren sexy, but always my presence is a poison. They try to burn me, drown me, weigh me down, stake me, break me, take my crown. Say I'm polluted, dirty, and so I am. I'm the shadow cast by every woman you've ever known. Let them say what they want, but I know the truth. And tonight, my child, I'll tell it to you. We are the ones who make things and make things happen. We are the ones who imagine, image mages, symbol spinsters. We who are fluent in lunar language. We who answer to the ancestors. We who are overcome by furred spirits and feathered forces. We who take pleasure in flight, on brooms, in bedrooms, riding backwards on goats through all weather and wilderness. We who love in the half-light. Bearer of daggers and keys for great unlockings, or, if you'd rather, for the safekeeping of secrets, deep and diamond. I've got gateways and grottos and gardens that need guarding. I leave a path for you to follow in the dirt. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake, datura, I sing night songs to vespertine flowers. And because it's apparent that not all people wish to parent, pennyroyal, tansy, rue, and wild carrot, I choose, and in the choosing, I honor everybody. Come partake in my vegetal feast, red cabbage, alchemical rose, fungus among us, garlic bulbs. I feed you root wisdom, a romance with plants. I learn from no one book. I study as I please. I follow a trail of biblio breadcrumbs. I read the writing in the leaves. I wield a wand, a brush, a pen, a word. Abracadabra, hocus pocus, gurnar, cur, car. Double, double, let's get in trouble. Let's invoke the gods of mischief and moon. Let's get ourselves truly lightheaded. Let's see how free we can be. I mix potions of cloud and sea and soil. I mix metals and metaphors. I'm a mixed up pan-aged polymorph, swapping genders and tales. Eye teeth, nails, a lock of hair, cinnamon, beeswax, a whisker, a stone, salt, a subway penny, a bronze rhombus, a wing, a piece of string, flower petals, blood and honey and bone. I'll alter your altar, have you praying on your knees to the dear ones with great fear, then make you laugh your ass off at the monsters that appear. Stooping low or drawing down Diana, I am here to shift your shapes. Holy trickstrix, who dwells betwixt and between. Pull back my veil, and I'm no clearer seen. I'm detective to a mystery I never want solved. My spiky millinery is a 5-pointed star. I call upon the 4 elements, and poof, here they are. I am La Hermana Trismegistus, double-snaked and singular. I am the daughter of Hecate, of Isis, of Inanna. I am the child of Ixchel, Jiwangmu, and Caradwen. Kali, Perchta, Oya have birthed me. My mothers are the Moire, the Norns, triple-faced Trivia. I am the offspring of Grandma Spider, of Luna, of Lilith. The nameless goddess gave me life. Call out for me. Call me Marion Leatherby. Call me Lolly Willows. Call me Juniper, Medea, Circe, Thessaly. Call me Baba Yaga. Call me Sycorax, Morgana, Hermione, Willow, Aradia. Call me Robin Rose, Rachel, Susan, Jessie, Donna, Nina, Trudy, Sonia, Pauline, Faye, Ray, Dora, Emily, Melissa, Johanna, Judica, Glenna, Tarsha, Teresa, Colleen, Myra, Ellen, Neil, Alan, Polly, Jean, Leonora, Remedios, Kati, Rosaline, Valley, Marjorie, Marie, Christina, Olivia, Hilma, Mary, Margot, Hildegard, Patty, Joan, Matilda, Ethel, Pixie, Adela, Ritika, Diane, Helena, Miriam, Susanna, Gerald, Alex, Maxine. Call me Our Lady of Perpetual Transgression, Sacred Cowgirl of the Cross Rodeo, she who bears the opposites, La Bête Violette, Fraulein Phosphoros, shaman of shamelessness. She is me, up late, wide awake, mixtape trancing, lighting candles to keep next-door gorgons at bay, pricking leather with a pin, seashells in the bath. Small in the backyard woods, in the magical place, communing with ferns and puddles that come and go with the rain. Dancing around hairspray-fueled fires and smoking drugstore cigarillos, scribbling in notebooks in the lining of jackets, making a shrine of suburban walls. Look for me. I live in a chicken hut, brothel, kitchen, cellar, cave in a house made of candy. You can find me in the margins, in the heart of the forest, in the dustiest apartment, in the grayest building, in the largest city you've ever been. I'm here on the fringes of the crowd, watching, waiting for you. I'm here in the sound of nocturnal arias. You can find me burning incense at the feet of oracles and outcasts. You can find me meeting in covert covens, turning wheels, turning colors, turning the tide. I bend things, blend things, mend the broken. I see things, spell things, speak the unspoken. I'll heal you, I'll hex you, and both are a gift. I'll craft you a disaster, then offer you a lift. Tell me of your wounds and the winding roads that got you here. Let me hold you in my cauldron and brew you brighter. I'll arm you with crystals and a silver-tipped knife. I'll curse you in cursive, bless you with messes. My darling, if you let me, I'll transmute your very life. Protector of boundaries, transcender of limits, I honor every dark and trembling part of you and remind you of the torch in your core. Believe in me. Become me. I beckon you close and closer still.
Kia ora Wellington, kia ora koutou, how are you all? We are here in Brooklyn, New York. This is Pam Grossman and I'm Gemma Gracewood. But enough about me and more about Pam, who is amazing. You wrote, of course, What is a Witch, which we just heard, and it's stunning. You are also an independent curator and writer and a teacher of magical practice, which sounds fascinating, and we'll talk more about that. For those following along at home, or may have been following along since 2005, you have been keeping a blog called Phantasmaphile, where you write about art and culture from a sort of fantastical, esoteric perspective. Mm-hmm. And you are also currently working on a book which will cover witch iconography. Is that fair to say?
That's the intent anyway.
That's the intent, okay.
It's a work in process.
Work in progress.
Yeah.
On top of all of that, you also have a day job, like most of us, only yours is Director of Visual Trends at Getty Images, which sounds absolutely fascinating, and I hope that we can talk a bit about that too. But first, let's start with a quote by Aleister Crowley, who is, of course, central to this exhibition, and you know his work well. He says, "All art is magic." What's your reaction to that?
I have always loved that quote from him, and I think it's a beautiful way of looking at artwork, because creating art is a magical act in that you have an intention. You are pulling something from imaginal space or the immaterial realm into the material world. So I can think of no better metaphor for art than magic.
Pam, thank you for reading your gorgeous book, What is a Witch? It's so beautiful. Can you tell us a little about the people you worked with, Tin Can Forest, to create this gorgeous graphic novel?
Tin Can Forest are a husband and wife duo based in Toronto, and I've been a big fan of their work for a long time, and they've been a fan of my blog Phantasmaphile for a long time, so I was so excited to get to collaborate with them. And essentially what I wanted to do was to celebrate the archetype of the witch and all her different facets, because if you really think about what a witch is, there's so many different answers and so many different versions. So I wanted to unpack that and to celebrate it and to have beautiful artwork put against it. So I'm thrilled that the response has been so lovely.
What is a witch?
You would think I would have a very succinct answer to that, but in fact there are so many different responses that question elicits from me. Right now I'll say that a witch is usually, but not always, a female transformer. She is an entity who uses the power of her imagination and her intention to transform herself and the world.
Ooh, I quite like that. Hello, pussycat. You know, one of the things that often goes along with imagery of witches is cats, and you have 2 cats, and I think it's important to make note of that because the cats may visit us during this interview.
Yes, one is visiting me right now. Little Albie down there.
Okay, so if we hear strange sounds, it's just the cats, everybody. It's fine. Is it safe to assume that you identify as a witch?
That's right.
And is there anything else that you identify as?
Sure, lots of things. I'm a feminist. I was raised Jewish, which is still part of my heritage and my background. I'm an artist. And I actually believe that artists and witches are very interrelated, so there's certainly lots of different ways that I identify and work in the world.
It's interesting because once upon a time it actually wasn't safe to identify as a witch, and so I'm wondering, do you feel safe identifying as a witch now?
You know, it really depends on the context, and it's still not safe to identify as a witch in lots of parts of the world.
This is true. There are women in Papua New Guinea, even, and
in
Bougainville,
India, lots of places where you can still get killed. And there are parts in my country where they're very, very Christian, or, you know, other religions where they view witchcraft as being associated with diabolism or demonology. And that is not what I practice, for the record. But, you know, also the word witch, it's a destabilizing word. That's one of the reasons that I love the word, but it comes with risk. And I am careful about who I'm talking to and how much context or explanation I'm able to offer when I use that word in regards to myself.
Yeah, it's important to bring that up, especially in the context of New Zealand. The general election will have happened by the time this interview screens, but what tends to happen during an election period, I don't know about here, especially when women are running, is that at some point, at least one of those women will be called a witch in a negative context.
Yes, absolutely.
And I do remember the last election in New Zealand, one, I would say, right-wing neoliberal politician in particular was being called a witch by people on the left, and a bunch of us felt that we had to jump in there and go, actually, let's preserve that word and not use it in a negative context that it's always been used in.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. I don't know that it's ever going to go away. You know, that word has some tarnish on it. It has some shadow to it. And I think the shadow is actually an important aspect of that word. That said, you know, Hillary Clinton was called a witch. Nancy Pelosi has been called a witch. Also, you know, people from Martha Stewart to, I mean, I've called Oprah Winfrey a witch in a positive way. But certainly that negative epithet is part of the word. And, you know, anytime there's a woman with power or a woman that we feel threatens the standards of our society, witch is one of the first words that we go to. And that's why I really like the reappropriation of that word. Similarly to a lot of women calling themselves nasty woman when Trump, I didn't want to say his name.
We'll get to that. It's all right. It's going to come up.
But when he called Hillary Clinton a nasty woman, so many women then decided to reappropriate that term and wear it like a badge of honor. And we're seeing the same thing happen with the word witch.
Yeah, I mean, it is really a time-worn practice to reappropriate the crappy stuff they say about us, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of magic in transmogrifying that word and taking ownership over it.
So you've spoken about witches being archetypal characters, and they're also usually unmistakably female, allowing for some gender fluidity. Are witches, would you say, the ultimate feminist icon?
I think they are, because unlike most female archetypes, virgins, whores, mothers, daughters, witches derive meaning from themselves, not from relationship to anybody else. They have power on their own terms. They have power that either comes from within or from some greater source, depending on your belief, or maybe some combination of both. But it's a female archetype that is self-defining, and it's very, very rare. So I think she's an absolute feminist icon, and she encompasses so many different aspects of the female experience.
Interestingly, you know, people assume that the male version of a witch is a wizard or a warlock, but I know that a lot of men do identify as witches. So I'd like to hear you talk about the positive role that men can play in witchcraft.
Absolutely. Well, one of the men who really popularized the idea of the witch again is Gerald Gardner, who essentially started the religion of Wicca. A lot of people think that Wicca is this ancient religion, and in fact, it was started in the late 40s, early 50s by a Brit and a man who wanted to syncretize a lot of different magical systems together and honor the female and male deities or principles that he felt in relationship with. So hats off to Gerald Gardner. But it is a relatively young religion, only about, 75 years old or so. I have a lot of male friends who identify with the witch. A lot of them call themselves witches. Some of them call themselves magicians. I don't know anyone personally that calls himself a warlock, but hey, whatever feels right, you know, that's the fun of language.
And this is getting super technical, but are there feminist witch separatists who believe that men cannot be witches by definition?
Well, there are certainly some female practitioners of witchcraft who believe that it is a distinctly feminine practice. And I would argue that there have been cunning folk and male magicians, as long as we have been tracking these kinds of practices and beliefs. So I don't believe that it's only for women. That said, it is a distinctly feminine energy that I think a lot of us are tapping into when we talk about witches.
I've heard you describe Oprah Winfrey as one of the ultimate witches of modern times.
Flutter.
What is it? What is it about Oprah?
Yeah, and I say that sort of tongue-in-cheek, but sort of not. Because if you think about it, Oprah was one of the first people to really popularize the idea of intention and to talk about using the power of your mind to manifest real things and real change in yourself or in the material world. She also used the tool of television to amplify this message, which is a really powerful kind of magic trick or magic spell, if you think about it. And lastly, she is playing Mrs. Witch in the new Wrinkle in Time movie, which I'm very excited about. So I'm not the only one who sees her witchiness.
Of course, of course. I mean, a lot of people think of Oprah as a goddess, and I'm interested in the distinction between witches and goddesses, but also the relationship between them.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think Oprah's a goddess too. Don't get me started. I'm telling you, I love her, and I am constantly defending Oprah and apologizing for her because I think a lot of people really do dismiss her, at least in the circles that I'm traveling in. All that said, in terms of goddesses and witches, I think the important thing to think about is witches are human, and goddesses are deities, and witches might be communicating with goddesses, or they might be, having some kind of relationship with the goddess. But, the fact that witches are human beings who have magical powers or who engage in magical acts is the real distinction there.
Right. But we all come from the goddess.
Well, I would say so. And certainly, if you trace a lot of fairy tales, for example, many of them began as goddess stories that then got reinterpreted and morphed into fairy tale stories. So, and the same thing is true. There's a really wonderful book by Jack Zipes called The Irresistible Fairy Tale. And he has a wonderful chapter about the relationship between fairy stories and witch stories. So all of these magical female stories have gotten woven together. And that's the wonderful thing about archetypes is they shift and they morph and they change shape. And so I think witches are related to goddesses and related to fairies and all of these other magical feminine entities for sure, but they're also distinctly human.
Nice. Tens of thousands of women, possibly more than we'll ever know, have been killed, murdered, because they were assumed to be witches, whether they were or not. And so they've become a sort of symbol for the suppression of women and have been adopted by 19th and 20th century women's liberation organizations as a kind of symbol, a very powerful symbol. And so I'm interested to hear what part you think witchcraft plays in the contemporary feminist movement.
It's a wonderful question, and I get just so many emails every time there's a march of photographs of people dressed up like witches or holding witch signage now, or people saying hex Trump or hex the patriarchy, and it's so heartening. It really, really delights me. But I think it's related because first and foremost, all the things we touched on already, that it's about women trying to own their power and own their voice and be unapologetically defensive of their position in the world. But there's also a very specific callback to a group called Witch, and it was an acronym, WITCH, which stood for various things at various times. But this was a group that was an activist art group in the 1960s, and these women would dress up like witches, and they would do things like hex the New York Stock Exchange. They were completely radical, and they were funny. It was kind of a mix between between performance art and activism. And so we're seeing these new groups crop up, this kind of resurrection of the witch group from the 60s. I believe it started in Portland, but we're seeing these witch activists happening all over the place now.
I know you don't want to, but let's talk about witchcraft in the age of Trump.
Oh, we have to.
Well, we have to in the context of witchcraft.
Of course.
Because it seems like there is, a new uprising of witches and of, hexes on the White House or wherever, in the age of this leader who would seek to, with his party, shut down our ownership of our own bodies through legislation, which just seems so backwards. What's the difference between putting a hex on someone and binding them?
Binding and hexing are a bit different. Hexing is usually trying to hurt somebody, harm somebody. It's a curse. Whereas binding someone is preventing them from doing harm to others. So I personally don't practice hexing or cursing. I do know some people who do, but most people...
Is binding the non-violent protest of the witch world?
That's actually a really great way of putting it. Okay. It's about... it's not about anything awful happening to Trump. It's about making sure he doesn't do awful things to other people. So if you picture in your mind literally like him being wrapped like a mummy or in a cocoon or something or a straitjacket, that's the kind of energetic work that those of us who engage in binding Trump spells are trying to conjure up there.
Have you bound Trump?
I have participated in some of the Trump binding spellcraft. I figure, what's the harm? And I know Lana Del Rey, the musician, has, really popularized this. And essentially every new moon, there are witches all over the world who are trying to bind Trump with their different spells. I don't follow the spell that went viral. There's some language in there that I'm not very comfortable with, so I've made my own rituals. But it's something that a lot of people are participating in, and let's hope it works.
So we're starting to see a witch being seen as a good thing, as a positive thing. We love to use that word in an empowering way, but at the same time, we're still using the word witch hunt for the very common practice of seeking to suppress a woman in power. Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw it here with Hillary Clinton, of course, and New Zealand's just had its general election, during which one of our female leaders had to resign as a result, in fairness, of an admission she made about when she was a younger solo mother. And yet the response, certainly from a portion of society, we felt that it was much stronger than it needed to be. The word witch hunt was certainly used. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about the notion of witch hunt in contemporary society.
Trump recently said that he was the subject of a witch hunt.
I see. So witch hunts are not gender exclusive?
No, they're not. They're absolutely not. And, it's very ironic to hear the current president, I can't even say my president, the current president, use that terminology, especially when, as we know, he's engaged in so much of that kind of shaming or attacks against specifically women. So it's a term that is absolutely used time and time again, often by people who don't actually know what it means.
Let's go back 1 year to 2016. You curated an exhibition called The Language of Birds, the Occult and Art. Mm-hmm. You included Aleister Crowley in your exhibition as well. Where does he sit in your view of witchcraft and art?
Well, he definitely has quite a reputation, and for good reason. He was certainly a controversial, rebellious character in his day and age. That said, he was an amazingly prolific writer. He was somebody who absolutely believed that art was one of the most important ways to access the divine. And so his influence, his own creative output, his own devotion, I think, is something that is worthy of absolute respect. He's not necessarily somebody that is in my personal pantheon, and I know that many people in the audience adore Aleister Crowley, so I mean no offense. I have other artists, especially a lot of artists like Remedios Varo, and I mentioned Leonora Carrington, and a lot of the female surrealists who, make me go all aflutter the way Aleister Crowley makes some other people go all aflutter. But, it is very important to acknowledge him as someone who had such influence on the art world, on religious systems, and on modern spirituality, hands down.
Part of the reason for this interview and for this evening's events at City Gallery being held is to celebrate Rosaline Norton. It's her 100th anniversary, or was on the 2nd of October. You included her in your exhibition, and I noticed you also had a shout out to her in your book, What is a Witch?
Yes.
Where does she sit in your art heart?
I love her. What an amazing human being. I mean, we're talking about a woman who in the late 40s and early 50s was creating work that was so deeply powerful, so incredibly transgressive, and she really was like witches, I believe, should be. She was very self-defining. She connected with the deity Pan, and she came up with an entire personal practice to honor him, as well as the goddess Hecate. And she used artwork to celebrate sexuality and to celebrate the life force that is within us all and connects us all. She had, a book that was, if I'm remembering correctly, made her the subject of some legal battles because it was so controversial. People thought she was a pornographer. She had an art show that was closed down. I mean, what a badass. So I absolutely adore her, and I just think it's thrilling that she is finally getting her due. So happy birthday, Rowi.
And yet she was shunned for so many years for her practice. Mm-hmm. If she were alive today or born today, how do you think she would be received?
I think people would be a bit kinder to her, but we still don't really like it when women are very sexual. Women who create images that are, I don't want to call it pornographic, erotic. It's still off-putting. Think how many images of naked women there are in the hallowed halls of our art institutions versus how many naked men there are. And she was all about phalluses and sexy devils and, erect pan figures. So I still think she would be a very destabilizing force, but hopefully not one that would be coming under the policeman's thumb as much as she did in her day.
On your website, you've got a really lovely, playful line that says, making magic since 1981. Does that mean you were born a witch?
That's right. So the reason I have that funny little catchphrase is, first of all, because so many people try to hide their age, and that's just something I'm trying really hard to push up against. I don't want to be ashamed of being too old or too young or too anything.
Well, I mean, you're still 12, so it doesn't... But I know what you
36.
mean. 36.
Yeah. That said, I have always been interested in magic. I never grew out of that phase. I've just grown more deeply into it. And I feel really blessed that I'm alive in a time when I can study these things and celebrate these things relatively openly and relatively publicly, because it has brought so much beauty and meaning and magic into my life. But yeah, I've always been like this. People often ask me, when did you get interested in this? Or when did you start being a witch? And this is just how I am. I don't know how to explain it any other way.
Beyond the gallery, beyond contemporary art, we are seeing witches and Wiccan iconography pop up everywhere, from Comme des Garçons and Marc Jacob to Outlander, the TV series. I mean, we have to probably talk about Wicked, the musical, a little, because that's got to have been an influence on, the new wave of witches coming through. And it's all sort of part of what the British academic Christopher Partridge has coined occulture. So not pop culture, but occulture. Do you think that the role that contemporary art galleries have played in bringing out the hidden and the occult is part of this? I mean, because, writers and fashion designers, all these people often look to art to sort of get influence and inspiration.
Absolutely. And, just in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a real explosion. If you think about films like The Witch or Love Witch, or television shows like Penny Dreadful or American Horror Story Coven, it really does seem like this amazing, I keep calling it the witch wave. It's not just the fourth wave of feminism, it's the witch wave that is crashing right now. And it's a really exciting and cool thing to witness and be part of. And absolutely, I think the fine art world, we have seen some major, incredible shows over the last 5 or 6 years at the Pompidou. I'm thinking of Le Trace du Sacre, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, show that was one of the, to my mind, earlier kind of marquee shows. There was a show in Ireland recently. There have been shows in France. There have been shows here in New York. And so that's been really, really heartening to witness. And I think it speaks to this real resurgence of enchantment that people are longing for. We are in the digital age, and we are in this time when we have more access to knowledge than ever before, which means we can connect with all of our weird little fascinations and, read books and have access to lots of lines of knowledge that we never had before. But it also means that in some ways we're more distanced from one another. We have this illusion of connection, and yet there is that strange kind of alienation or veil that comes between us and other people with the screen. And I think what that does is it makes people long for real, tangible experiences. We're longing for connection. We're longing for magic. We're longing for spirituality. And so art, fashion, pop culture, reading tarot cards, listening to Azalea Banks, who came out as a witch recently, whatever it is, I think they're all different facets to this crystal. And that is a very hopeful one, because ultimately what magic posits is that through the power of our imaginations, we can change the world. And I can think of no more important message than right now, because this world needs a lot of changing.
Well, you're trying to do that incrementally in your day job. Speaking of the digital world, so you are the director of visual trends at Getty Images, and I'm guessing part of that is to do with making sure that stock photos of families are more than just nuclear, white, heterosexual families.
Yep.
So it's increasing diversity in the imagery that's available to brands and businesses, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, have you started seeing any witchy imagery coming through, or how does your background help influence what you do in your day job?
Yeah, there certainly is a bit of a witchy or gothic aesthetic that comes through in the photography world, for sure. But a lot of the work that I do is a little bit broader and a little bit more subtle. So what I mean by that is one of the projects that I oversee is around using the power of images to repicture what a woman even looks like. Everything from how she holds herself in a photo to the color of her skin to who she's married to or what her family looks like or what her job is, what her body is, how old she is. We're really trying to broaden the spectrum of what a powerful, dynamic female looks like in photography. So...
Oh, great. So we're going to move away from the working mom being a mother in a suit holding a baby and a phone?
Exactly.
Awesome.
That's exactly it.
And are we moving away from all those comical photos of white women eating salad?
Yes, absolutely. If I see 0 more pictures of white women laughing eating salad, it will still be too many. It's enough already. Or owning a flower shop. Yeah, just enough.
So in a way, even if it's not directly iconography around witches, it's the self-defining woman.
That's exactly right.
So, you're working in the same world, whether you're at your day job or whether you're here at home with your cat.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm not here, and when I say here, I mean on this earth. I'm not here in my life to try to convert everybody to witchcraft. If I'm the only person who likes witches, that's fine with me. What I do want is for powerful women to be celebrated. That's in government, that's in family life, that's in friendships and relationships, as the heads of companies. That is what I want. And so just because witchcraft or magic is a personal driver for me, certainly I love talking about witches and celebrating them, but I'm not here to popularize them. What I'm here to do, or one of the several things that I believe I'm here to do, is to amplify the powerful female current. And whether that's through stock photography or it's through a comic book, I'm cool with whatever.
It can also be through scholarship. Let's talk about the academy and about the increasing study of the occult and of witchcraft. And you're being involved in that yourself in some way.
Absolutely. So I am very fortunate in that I get to co-organize a conference at NYU every couple years called the Occult Humanities Conference. And this is in partnership with my dear friend and frequent collaborator, Jesse Bransford, who's an unbelievably gifted esoteric artist himself. And he also runs the undergraduate fine art department at NYU. So think of all of those youngsters that he's influencing. It just fills my heart with joy. But this is a conference that is funded by NYU, and it's a place where we're celebrating just the things that we're discussing. The overlap between art and magic and the history of the influence and relationship between the two.
This would be unthinkable in universities even as recently as 30 years ago.
Yep. Absolutely right. So, and we're starting to slowly but surely see paths of academia and, higher education degrees that one can get in Western esotericism, or there's one in Texas at Rice University, and I believe it's Gnosticism, Esotericism, and Mysticism. It's the GEM coursework. So, it's starting to happen, and that to me is very validating and very heartening for the reasons that we've discussed. It's about legitimizing these paths as valid and as worthy of further inquiry and further celebration.
Is it a divine feminist rewriting of our institutional histories?
Wouldn't that be nice? I also think it's, some of it is just public interest. It sounds kind of silly to say, but we have a generation of kids that grew up on Harry Potter, which is a deeply magical text. Whether or not you believe in magic, it's a fact that the idea of magic has influenced thousands of years of art making. And that alone means that it is a crucial part of the human experience that I think we should all strive to understand and connect with.
I'm glad you brought up Harry Potter. I want to know what you think of Hermione.
Oh, well, somebody's very excited about Hermione. I love Hermione, and one of the reasons that she's one of my favorite witches in literature is that she is smart. So often witches, especially teen witches in older stories, they're kind of overwhelmed by their magic, and it's a real metaphor for coming of age. Suddenly their magic kicks in and they can't control it, and they have to learn how to refine it.
I can't control my orgasm.
Exactly.
Basically.
Pretty much. My hormones, my body's changing, I'm menstruating, / magical, right?
Yeah.
And what I love about Hermione is certainly she makes some mistakes, but like Willow in Buffy, she's somebody who goes to the library to seek answers, and being intelligent and being, somebody who has aptitude and skills is celebrated. And I love that. I love the combination of not just that she's intuitive and magical, but she's intelligent. She's done her research. She's done her work. And I think that's a really beautiful paradigm for anybody to try to emulate.
And can you tell me about some of your other favourite witches in literature and art and music, film?
Well, some of them I actually mention in What is a Witch? So there's Lolly Willows, who's the protagonist of a book of the same name by Sylvia Townsend Warner, whom I adore. She's a spinster. I think she's in her 30s, my age, but she's a spinster in the book, and she decides to reject married life and live in the woods and become a witch. She's so badass. I love Marion Leatherby, who's the protagonist of one of Leonora Carrington's books called The Hearing Trumpet, and she's 90-something, and she's a witch. One of my favorite witches is a character named Juniper from a series of books written by Monica Furlong. And I loved this series when I was a child. It's a trilogy. The first one is called Wise Child, the second is called Juniper, and the third is called Coleman. And Juniper is the village witch who takes in the young wise child and becomes a mother figure to her. And it's a story about chosen family, about love, about scholarship, and about using the power of good to fight evil. There's some malevolent wizards and witches that they fight against. And, these characters all celebrate, if you think about it, different aspects of womanhood. They're all different ages, and they all have a similarity in that they're a bit of an outsider in their community, and yet they have so much knowledge and power and beauty to share with the world.
You mentioned before that you want to be open about age because of the stigma around women and aging. Are you looking forward to being a crone?
I think I am a crone. Yes, I think, there's a great quote by Kiki Smith, the artist, and she says, "I have always been the crone." And I feel that way too. I've always been kind of an old soul. So I'm certainly not rushing to get there physically, but it's definitely an archetype that I love and relate to, and that I think we would all be wise to honor in this age of everybody trying to be young. There's so much wisdom that comes with experience, and I'm definitely looking forward to being more wise.
What's the most common spell that you're asked to perform?
Oh, well, that's changed. When I was younger, it was love spells, of course.
Of course.
But now that most of my friends are happily married, it's often blessings for their children to be, if they're pregnant, or newborns, or it's spells to help them with their careers or their health.
Not money?
Well,
Not
I guess
Trump?
that's kind of careers. Yeah, I mean, those all come up, but it's usually about kind of the bigger picture, about, either blessings for their wellness or wanting to make sure they're living to their higher purpose. And that's most often the kind of workings that I do for myself. It's rarely trying to manifest something specific. It's usually about trying to make sure I'm being of service to something greater than myself.
This may be a stupid question, but I'm a huge fan of stupid questions, as you know. Do you ever use the word abracadabra?
I do not.
Does anyone?
That term is actually
bibbidi bobbidi boo.
Yeah. Abracadabra is a really powerful term. If I'm remembering correctly, it means something to the effect of, I create as I speak. In other words, I say it and so it is. And I love that idea that our language and the power of our words can change us and change, our everyday life. So it's not necessarily a word that I'm using in my own spellcrafting that often, but I do give it a little shout out in What is a Witch?
New Zealand is in spring now. We're approaching the summer solstice. What is one of your favourite rituals that you could share with us as we prepare for December?
So summer solstice is one of my favorite holidays. And it really is a holiday about fire and brightness and solar energy. So one of the things I like to do is, if I can light a bonfire somewhere, great, but even if it's just a candle, do some kind of work to celebrate anything that I want to shed light on, anything that I'm hoping to gain illumination for. It's also a great ritual if you want to burn something you'd like to get rid of in a candle. So if there's some aspect of yourself or of your life that you are hoping to see disappear, it's a good thing to do some fire magic around that.
This has been an amazing conversation, and it's probably time to open up for questions, bring you in on the live Skype to Wellington. So I'll just ask my last question. Last question is magic nurture or nature? Are you born with it, or can you develop it and, in fact, be gifted it by other people?
Well, one of my most common answers for a lot of binary questions like that is that it is possible to hold the opposites. And there's actually a lot of power in a both and paradigm. So certainly there are some people who are born this way. There are people who, for whatever the reason, they gravitate towards magical things. They are very comfortable in that deep state of imaginal play. I actually think most of us as children are. And, people who, rather than tamping down their instincts and their intuition, they naturally just learn how to refine that. That said, it's never too late. And there are many, many people who didn't grow up with any sense of magic in their lives who, approach it later in life. And it's such a rich body of knowledge and practice. So I believe magic is for anybody who's interested in it.
Cat.
This is Pam's cat, one of them.
Yes,
which one's this?
That's Albie.
Named
He's
after?
a love. Named after the playwright Edward Albee. But it's more fun to say Albie.
Yeah.
And then we have Remy floating around somewhere. She's named after Remedios Varo, my favorite female surrealist painter and a witch. And
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us in your house.
Are you kidding me? This was so much fun.
For reading to us. And now we're going to go back to Wellington, where hopefully through the magic of the internet, Pam will appear live and in person for a few more questions.
See you soon. Bye.